Good morning. This day, Thursday, February 2nd, 1956. It's 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and this is Ray Scher at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, where the 4th Annual Congressional is underway. President Eisenhower is here this morning, as you can see, and Dave Garraway is standing by at the RCA Exhibit Hall in New York while we bring this direct portion of today to you direct from Washington.
Now, this morning, you are the guests of a Christian layman with whom I have had the privilege of working the last few years. He is a most generous host who has not hesitated to give of his time and use of his means in advancing Christian programs. It's a distinct honor to present one of the outstanding businessmen of the nation who has done so much and will do much more in the interests of this cause, Mr. Conrad Hilton.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, Reverend distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the most effective story or picture of prayer in action that I know is 2,000 years old and was told by the greatest storyteller of all time. As I recall it, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers. They beat him, robbed him, and left him dying by the side of the road. A number of people passed by, looked, and went on. I suppose they were very busy people. Finally, a man came along on a donkey. He stopped, cared for the injured man's wounds, put him on his animal, and took him to an inn. Incidentally, one of the first hotels mentioned in history. There, he found him a room and left the injured man in good hands. That is what I call prayer in action. The Good Samaritan showed great compassion and great thoughtfulness. He must have been a prayerful man, inasmuch as one does not and cannot act in this religious fashion unless he is warmed by the friendship of God in prayer. This great classic short story, one of the finest in any language, seems to me to be applicable today in a number of ways. It can be applied within our families, in our neighborhood, in our cities and states. In fact, it could be an illustration of our national ideal. More than that, since so many modern nations are lying by the side of the road, injured economically, politically, or culturally, it might very well be our obligation, our privilege, to pick them up and take them along with us to greater assurance of security, peace, and happiness. We in America have been born very rich indeed. As individuals and as a nation, we have inherited great wealth, economically, culturally, and spiritually. I think it is our obligation to share it. Some of these nations, large and small, have fallen among robbers, and there is great danger of more of them falling among the same robbers. There are bands of them now prowling in the Near East, the Middle East, the Far East. Others are in Africa and Latin America. I think we will be showing ourselves internationally prayerful men and an internationally prayerful nation if we show a willingness to stop on the road along the broad highway of political and economic prosperity long enough to assist these nations. In fact, I would say what this world needs more than anything else today is an awareness of its own unity, an admission of the fact that not only men, but also nations are brothers, that we have a right to expect another nation to assist us if we fall among robbers. The ironic fact is that almost half the world today is being taught to put its hope in the robbers. This is not the time nor the place to discuss the political implications of this international fact. But this much I will say. Prayer is not enough. We must, as a Jesuit told me some time ago, pray as if it all depended upon God, and act as if it all depended on ourselves. When we have done this on an international level, we shall indeed be good Samaritans, indeed men of prayer, indeed religious men. And I think 1,000 years from now, men will speak of our goodness as a nation, just as we recall today the goodness of the man who helped another man on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Speaking of prayer, one of the most inspiring prayers I ever heard was offered by President Eisenhower during his inauguration. When I learned that this prayer was written in the presidential suite of the Statler Hotel the morning of the inauguration, I had it inscribed on a silver plaque. And I would like to present this plaque together with the desk and the chair to you, Mr. President, with our best wishes for your continued good health and happiness.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasing as this is, it doesn't speak well for Senator Carlson's discipline over his command this morning. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hilton and my friends, it is a touching thing that Mr. Hilton has done in presenting to me this plaque and the desk and the chair where I wrote the little prayer that I used at the inauguration some 3 years and more ago. That incident brought to me a great lesson. It seemed to me a perfectly natural thing to do. I was seeking some way to impress upon the audience at that moment that all of us realized a new chief executive was being inaugurated over a nation that was founded on a religious faith. Our founding documents so state. In explaining, our government and what we intended to do in the Declaration, our founding fathers held it was the Creator that gave us certain rights, and this government was set up to sustain them. So that seemed to me a perfectly natural thing to do as an emphatic way of showing that I also realized it. Now, it was with some astonishment that I began to see this response. Literally, thousands of messages coming in, some of them from people who didn't particularly think I was the man to occupy that place that day, still applauded that act. And here is the lesson, as I see it. I know very few men, I know very few people that tell me they are atheists or they are even agnostics. But we find among the laity a curious diffidence in merely stating the fact that they believe. There is a God, and he is more powerful than I, and I am dependent upon him. That's what the prayer did. And it was because a layman, as I see it, did do so. And, of course, in such a position that this response came in. Now, I think that that prayer is somewhat related to these prayer breakfasts. We can stay in our quarters, we can pray, but by gathering occasionally, and I understand this whole celebration is a week long, or this whole ceremony, something of a week long, by announcing to the world that we come up as laymen and meet, making the same acknowledgement was made in that prayer, we're doing exactly the same thing. We are telling people that this nation is still a nation under God.